You're not leaving until you tell me who hurt you. Mafia Boss cornered the maid's daughter. At 2 a.m., the iron gates of the Bellanti estate loomed against a sky that was the color of a bruised plum. It was just before dawn, that singular, quiet hour when Grayford City seemed to hold its breath before the inevitable exhale of exhaust and crime filled the streets. The air was sharp, biting at exposed skin. But Elena Rossetti did not feel the cold. She felt only the throbbing heat high on her left cheekbone, a pulsing reminder of a mistake she had made the night before. She pulled the collar of her wool coat up, tucking her chin down as she hurried toward the servants' entrance. The gravel crunched softly under her worn boots, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. Elena was 21 years old, and for nearly all of those years, she had learned the art of invisibility. As the daughter of Maria, the head housekeeper, Elena knew that the best way to survive in the orbit of the Bellanti crime family was to never be seen, never be heard, and never be remembered. But today, hiding was going to be difficult. She paused at the heavy oak door, catching her reflection in the dark glass pane. The concealer she had applied in her dim bathroom mirror back at the apartment looked cakey and orange under the exterior security lights. She cursed softly, dabbing at the edge of the makeup with her pinky. It was meant to hide the purple-yellow discoloration blooming across her cheek, a souvenir from a door frame she had been shoved into. Or at least, that was the lie she had prepared. She slipped inside, the warmth of the kitchen wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. The scent of espresso and baking bread was already in the air. The kitchen staff started at 4 a.m. sharp. Elena moved quickly, head down, aiming for the locker room to change into her uniform. "You're late, Elena." The voice was deep, smooth, and vibrated through the floorboards. It did not belong to the head chef. Elena froze. She forced her spine to straighten before turning slowly. Standing by the massive granite island, holding a pristine white espresso cup, was Domenico Bellanti. At 35, Domenico was the head of the family, a man whose reputation in Grayford was built on a foundation of ruthlessness and absolute precision. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, immaculate even at this ungodly hour. His dark hair swept back, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. He wasn't looking at his phone or a newspaper. He was looking directly at her. "I apologize, sir," Elena said, her voice steady despite the sudden hammering of her heart. She kept her face angled slightly away, offering him her profile rather than the full view. "The bus schedule changed. It won't happen again." Domenico took a slow sip of his coffee, his dark eyes narrowing by a fraction of an inch. He was a man who noticed everything. He noticed when a shipment was light by a single crate. He noticed when a rival associate sweated too much during a negotiation. And he noticed the way the light caught the unnatural texture on the cheek of the maid's daughter. He set the cup down. The clink of porcelain against granite echoed. "Look at me, Elena." It was a command, not a request. The air in the kitchen seemed to thin. Elena turned her head, lifting her chin with a defiance she didn't truly feel. She met his gaze. His eyes were the color of obsidian, unreadable and intense. He studied her face, his gaze sweeping over her features before locking onto the clumsy makeup job. For a moment, she thought he would reach out. His hand twitched at his side, a micro movement that only someone who spent a lifetime watching body language would catch. But he didn't. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't demand she wash her face. He simply stared, his jaw tightening, a muscle feathering near his ear. "Get to work," he said finally, his voice dropping an octave. Elena nodded, a sharp jerk of her head, and fled toward the locker room. She didn't see the way Domenico watched her go, his stillness more terrifying than any shout. The day passed in a blur of polished silver and lemon-scented wood polish. Elena worked with a ferocity that bordered on manic, trying to outrun the memory of the morning. As she dusted the library, her mind drifted, pulling her back to the past she tried so hard to bury. She'd grown up in these hallways. She remembered being 6 years old, sitting on the floor of the servants' quarters while her mother, Maria, soaked her tired feet in a plastic tub. Maria had been young then, beautiful in a tired way, but always fiercely protective. "We are guests here. Elena," Maria had told her, brushing Elena's hair. "Expensive guests. We serve, we smile, and we stay out of the way. The Belantes are wolves. We are not wolves. We are the grass the wolves walk on." Elena had learned that lesson well. She had seen men come into the estate laughing and never leave. She had seen cars arrive with bullet holes that were gone by morning. It was a world of violence draped in velvet, and she wanted no part of it. But poverty was a trap that was hard to escape. Her mother's arthritis was getting worse. The rent on their apartment in the East End was rising, and the medical bills from her mother's last flare-up were suffocating. So, Elena stayed. She cleaned the floors of the men who ruled the city, and she pretended she didn't exist. But the danger wasn't just inside the mansion. It was waiting for her at home, too. Later that afternoon, while polishing the banister of the grand staircase, her pocket vibrated. She froze, her hand gripping the rag tight. She checked the screen. It was Rafe. "I know you're at the big house. Don't think you can hide there forever. I need the money by Friday, or I pay Maria a visit at the laundry." The blood drained from Elena's face. Rafe was a mistake she had made 2 years ago. A charming smile that hid a rot so deep it tainted everything it touched. He ran with the Moretti crew, a low-level street gang that picked off the scraps the Belanti family left behind. He was small time, but to Elena, he was a monster. He was the reason for the bruise on her cheek. He was the reason she checked the locks on her door 3 times every night. She shoved the phone back into her pocket, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She couldn't tell anyone. If she went to the police, Rafe would hurt her mother. If she told the Belantes, well, one did not ask wolves for favors without paying a price. In the west wing of the estate, inside an office that was soundproofed and lined with mahogany, Domenico Belanti sat behind a desk that cost more than Elena's entire apartment building. A wall of monitors glowed softly to his left, displaying various feeds from around the city and the estate. He wasn't looking at the shipping manifests on his desk. He was rewinding a video feed from camera 4. The kitchen, on the screen, the timestamp read 4:15 in the morning. He watched the digital recording of Elena entering. He tapped a key, zooming in. The image was high definition, crisp enough to see the fraying thread on her coat button. He zoomed in further, focusing on her face, even through the digital grain. The swelling was undeniable. It wasn't an accident. A fall didn't leave a mark like that. A cabinet door didn't leave the imprint of what looked suspiciously like knuckles. Domenico leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. He felt a cold, sharp anger coiling in his gut. It surprised him. He was not a man given to emotional outbursts. He protected his family, his soldiers, and his assets. Elena Rossetti was technically an employee, a civilian. She wasn't his to protect, and yet, the image of her haunted eyes, the way she had flinched when he spoke to her, burned in his mind. She was the one pure thing in this house. A quiet constant who worked until her hands were raw. Someone had put their hands on her. He hit a button on his intercom. "Luca." A moment later, the door opened, and Luca, his second-in-command, stepped in. Luca was a bear of a man, loyal to the bone. "Boss?" "The girl. Elena. Maria's daughter," Domenico said, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Have a detail put on her. I want a shadow. Someone discreet. If she leaves the estate, I want to know where she goes and who she sees." Luca raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. "You think she's leaking something?" "No," Domenico said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I think she's in trouble, and she's too stubborn to ask for help." The rain started at 6 in the evening, a cold, relentless downpour that turned the world gray. Elena finished her shift, her body aching, her mind racing. The text from Rafe had been gnawing at her all day. Friday. She didn't have the money. She barely had enough for rent. She needed to talk to him, to beg him for more time, to distract him from her mother. She couldn't let him come to the house. She had to meet him on her terms, away from her mother. She changed out of her uniform and pulled on a thick, oversized black hoodie, pulling the hood low over her face. She slipped out the side door, avoiding the main driveway, intending to cut through the garden to the service gate. It was a longer route, but it was usually unmanned at this hour. The rain soaked through the cotton of her hoodie within seconds. She kept her head down, watching her boots splash in the puddles, rehearsing what she would say to Rafe. "Please, just one more week. I'll get in advance." She reached the stone archway that marked the boundary of the estate's inner gardens. Beyond it lay the street and the bus stop. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the archway, blocking her path. Elena gasped, skidding to a halt on the wet pavement. A flash of lightning illuminated the man standing before her. It was Domenico. He wore a long black trench coat, the collar turned up against the wind. He was soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, but he looked as immovable as the stone statues that lined the garden path. "Going somewhere?" he asked. His voice cut through the sound of the rain. Elena stepped back, her heart slamming against her ribs. I'm going home, sir. My shift is over." "The staff exit is that way." Domenico gestured vaguely behind him without looking. "You're cutting through the old grounds. People only go this way when they don't want to be seen. I like the walk," she lied, her voice trembling. She tried to sidestep him. "Please, Mr. Belanti, I'm tired." Domenico moved. It was a blur of motion, faster than a man of his size should have been capable of. He didn't grab her, but he placed himself directly in her trajectory, forcing her to stop or run right into his chest. He loomed over her, blocking out the streetlight, blocking out the world. "You're lying," he stated flatly. Elena looked up, water dripping from her eyelashes. The concealer had washed away in the rain. The bruise on her cheek was now stark, violent purple against her pale skin. Domenico looked at it. His expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Elena flinched, a sharp, instinctive jerk of her head. Domenico's hand froze. His eyes darkened, a storm more dangerous than the one raging around them. "You think I would hit you? I don't know what you would do," Elena whispered, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. "Please, let me go." "No." The word hung there. He took a step closer, backing her against the cold stone of the archway. He placed a hand on the stone beside her head, boxing her in. He wasn't touching her, but his presence was overwhelming. She could smell the rain on him, mixed with expensive cologne and the faint, metallic scent of danger. "You are shaking," he observed quietly. "I'm cold. You're terrified." Domenico leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath. "Who did that to your face, Elena?" She squeezed her eyes shut. "I fell. I told you." "Don't insult my intelligence," he growled, a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "That is an impact mark. Someone struck you." "Who was it? A boyfriend? A debt collector?" "It's none of your business," she snapped, opening her eyes. Panic was making her reckless. "I am just the maid's daughter. You don't care about us. Just let me go home." "You are under my protection while you are on this land," Domenico said, his voice turning hard. "And right now, you look like a wounded animal trying to run back to the trap." He moved his other hand, trapping her completely. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his black eyes. "You are not leaving until you tell me who hurt you." The demand broke her. The exhaustion, the fear of Rafe, the weight of the secret. It all crashed down. A sob ripped from her throat, harsh and jagged. Tears mixed with the rain on her face. "I can't," she choked out. "I can't tell you. He'll hurt her." Domenico's brow furrowed. The mother, Maria. "Elena," he said, his voice softening, losing its sharp edge. "Look at me." But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Panic surged, blind and primal. She saw an opening under his arm, and she took it. She ducked, scrambling away from him on the wet pavement. "Elena!" he shouted. She didn't look back. She ran toward the gate, her boots slipping on the wet leaves, her breath tearing at her lungs. She burst out onto the street and kept running until she reached the bus stop, collapsing onto the bench, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Back at the archway, Domenico stood alone in the rain. His hands were curled into fists at his sides, tight enough to turn the knuckles white. He watched the empty space where she had been. Rage pulsing through his veins. It was a restrained, cold rage, the kind that burned cities to the ground. Someone had put fear into her. Someone had made her afraid to speak. He turned and walked back toward the mansion, the rain unable to wash away the heat of his fury. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the sky a brilliant, innocent blue. The estate was quiet. Elena was in the library, dusting the rows of leather-bound books. She moved stiffly, her eyes red-rimmed. She hadn't slept. She heard the door click shut. She didn't turn around. She knew who it was. The air in the room shifted, becoming heavier, charged with electricity. "I brought you something," Domenico's voice said. Elena turned slowly. Domenico was standing there, not in a suit, but in a dark knit sweater and slacks. He looked less like a kingpin and more like a man. He held a small ice pack wrapped in a soft cloth and a tube of high-end arnica cream. He walked over to her, stopping a respectable distance away. He held out the items. "For the fall," he said, his voice devoid of the aggression from the night before. Elena looked at the items, then up at his face. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. "Thank you," she whispered, taking them. Her fingers brushed him for a fraction of a second. His skin was warm. "I was aggressive last night," Domenico said, clasping his hands behind his back. "I apologize. I do not like seeing unauthorized damage to things under my roof." It was a clumsy apology, framed in the language of ownership, but Elena heard the underlying note. He was trying. "It's okay," she said, clutching the ice pack. "I really did just fall. Mr. Belanti, I'm clumsy. You know that." Domenico stared at her. He saw the lie sitting in the hollow of her throat. He saw the tremor in her hands. "Right," he said dryly. "You fell." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "If you ever decide to stop falling, Elena, my door is unlocked." He left her there, surrounded by the silence of the books. That night, the city of Grayford was alive with neon and noise, but the Belanti estate was a fortress of quiet. Domenico sat in his office, the only light coming from the bank of monitors. He had dismissed Luca. He had dismissed the guards. He was alone with the ghosts and the data. He wasn't looking at the live feeds. He was looking at the archived footage from the external perimeter cameras. He had pulled the tapes from the last 3 weeks. He sat there for hours, scanning, fast-forwarding, searching, and then he found it. Camera 9, the South Gate, 2 nights ago, a black sedan, battered and rusted, idling across the street. The window rolled down, a man's face, lit by the flare of a lighter. Domenico froze the frame. He leaned in, his eyes narrowing. He recognized the face, not personally, but he knew the type, the cocky tilt of the head, the cheap tattoos on the neck, the hunger in the eyes. It was a bottom feeder, a scavenger. He typed a quick command, running facial recognition against the police database and his own private server. The results popped up in seconds. Name: Rafael Rafe Santoro. Affiliation: Moretti Crew. Low-level associate. Record: assault, petty theft, extortion, domestic disturbance. Domenico stared at the word domestic. He looked at the mug shot of Rafe Santoro. Then he looked at the timestamp. Rafe had been waiting for Elena. Domenico sat back in his chair. The pieces clicked together with the terrifying inevitability of a loaded gun. The bruise, the fear, the refusal to speak. It wasn't just a random attack. It was systematic. He looked at Rafe's face on the screen one last time. A cold calm settled over him. It was the calm of a judge passing a sentence. He didn't pick up the phone. He didn't call Luca yet. He simply stared at the predator on the screen, and in the silence of his office. Domenico Belanti made a decision. The law would not touch Rafe Santoro. The police would not help Elena Rossetti. But Domenico was not the law. He was the consequence. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a heavy, black lighter. He flicked it open, the flame dancing in the dark room, reflecting in his obsidian eyes. "Found you," he whispered. The file folder hit the mahogany desk with a heavy, final thud. It was thick, filled with the sordid, messy details of a life lived in the gutter. Luca stood on the other side of the desk, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression grim. Domenico Bellanti did not open it immediately. He sat in his high-backed leather chair, the morning light filtering through the blinds, casting striped shadows across his face. He stared at the name typed on the tab, Rafael Santoro. "Tell me," Domenico said, his voice low and dangerous. Luca cleared his throat. "He's exactly what you thought. Boss. Small-time runner for the Moretti crew. He moves cheap guns, runs a little protection racket in the East End, and deals in stolen electronics. But that is the clean part." Domenico's eyes flicked up. "And the dirty part?" "Gambling debts," Luca replied, his lip curling in distaste. "He owes money to people you do not want to owe money to. He's desperate. And when he gets desperate, he gets violent. He has 2 domestic assault charges that were dropped before they went to trial. Witnesses stopped cooperating." Domenico reached out and flipped the file open. The first photo was a surveillance shot of Rafe arguing with a dealer. The second was a police report from 3 years ago. The victim was a woman, not Elena. But the pattern was clear. Intimidation, control, brutality. "He's blackmailing her," Domenico concluded, the pieces fitting together in his mind like the tumblers of a safe. "He's bleeding her dry." "It looks that way," Luca agreed. "We found bank transfers from her account to a shell account linked to him. Small amounts, but for a maid. It is everything. She is paying him to stay away." Domenico closed the file. The leather cover felt cool under his palm. A cold, white-hot fury was spreading through his chest, freezing his blood. Elena was working herself to the bone, scrubbing floors and polishing silver, only to hand her earnings over to a parasite who thanked her with his fists. "Keep digging," Domenico ordered. "I want to know where he sleeps, where he eats, and who he answers to, and get the car ready. I need to have a conversation with Elena." Elena was late coming out of the laundry room. The heavy basket of linens was propped against her hip, but as she walked down the long hallway toward the east wing, her gait was uneven. Every step on her right leg caused a sharp intake of breath. A wince she tried to swallow before it reached her face. She had tripped yesterday. That was the story she was sticking to. She had tripped on the stairs at her apartment building. It was a lie, of course. Rafe had been waiting for her outside the grocery store. He hadn't hit her face this time. He had kicked her shin when she told him she didn't have the cash yet. She adjusted the basket, biting her lip. She just had to make it through the shift. "Elena..." She froze. The basket slipped slightly, and she hefted it back up. Domenico was standing at the end of the hall. He wasn't in a suit today. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the strong, corded muscles of his forearms. He looked less like a statue and more like a storm waiting to break. "Mr. Bellanti," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was just taking these to the guest quarters." "Leave the basket," he said. Elena hesitated. "Sir?" "Leave it," he repeated, walking toward her. His strides were long and purposeful. "Come to my office. Now." Panic flared in her chest. Had she done something wrong? Had he found out about Rafe? She set the basket down on the parquet floor and followed him. She tried to walk normally, to mask the limp, but it was impossible. Domenico slowed his pace, matching hers, his eyes tracking the uneven rhythm of her steps. He said nothing, which was worse than if he had shouted. They entered his private office. It was a sanctuary of silence and the smell of old paper and expensive scotch. Domenico closed the door and locked it. The click of the latch echoed like a gunshot. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the plush velvet armchair in front of his desk. Elena sat on the edge of the seat, her hands gripping her knees. She was wearing a long-sleeved cardigan over her uniform. Despite the warmth of the house, she felt small in the massive room, dwarfed by the power that radiated from the man standing in front of her. Domenico leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his ankles. He studied her for a long moment, Take off the jacket, Elena. Her heart stopped. I'm cold, sir. It is 72 degrees here, Domenico said softly. Take off the jacket. I really don't want to, she whispered, her voice trembling. Domenico moved. He didn't lunge, but he closed the distance between them with terrifying grace. He crouched down so he was eye level with her. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the zipper of her cardigan. I'm not asking because I want to hurt you, he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. I'm asking because I need to see what I am dealing with. He gently took the zipper pull and lowered it. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. She let him peel the fabric back from her shoulders. Domenico inhaled sharply. Her upper arms were a canvas of violence. Finger-shaped bruises, dark and ugly, marred her pale skin. They were the marks of someone who had been grabbed, shaken, and held down. There were older marks, yellow and fading, and fresh ones that were angry and purple. Domenico stared at the marks. His hand shook slightly as he traced the air above her skin, afraid to touch her, afraid he might shatter her. He did this, Domenico murmured. It wasn't a question. The man in the car, Rafe. Elena's eyes snapped open. How do you... I know everything, Elena, he said, his voice hard. I know he takes your money. I know he waits for you. I know he hurts you. He stood up, towering over her, his shadow consuming her. You don't have to protect him. I can end this. Just say the word. One word, Elena, and he will never touch you again. He will never draw another breath in this city. The brutality of his offer hung in the air. Elena looked at him, seeing the lethal intent in his eyes. He meant it. He would kill for her. But terror, cold and irrational, gripped her. She thought of her mother, alone at the warehouse. She thought of Rafe's threats, the text messages, the photos of her mother he had sent her. No, she gasped. Scrambling up from the chair, she pulled her jacket closed, her fingers fumbling. You can't. You don't understand. Make me understand, Domenico demanded. I can't. She bolted. She ran for the door, unlocking it with shaking hands, and fled into the hallway. Elena! Domenico roared. She didn't stop. She ran past the confused kitchen staff, past the library, heading for the staff staircase that led to the lower levels. She needed to get out. She needed to call her mom. She reached the landing of the staircase, her hand gripping the banister. But footsteps thundered behind her before she could take the first step down. A hand closed around her wrist. It wasn't painful, but it was firm, unyielding. Domenico spun her around. He didn't drag her. He stepped into her space, using his body to corral her against the wall. He pinned her there, his hands planted on the plaster on either side of her head, caging her in. She pressed her back against the wall, breathing hard, her chest heaving. They were inches apart. She could see the flecks of gray in his irises, the frantic pulse beating in his throat. He wasn't trying to intimidate her. He was desperate. Stop running from me, he rasped, his forehead resting against hers for a fleeting second before he pulled back to look her in the eye. Why are you protecting him? Do you love him? No, Elena cried, the accusation stinging more than the bruises. I hate him. I hate him more than anything. Then let me help you, Domenico pleaded. Why won't you let me help you? Because he's not just hurting me, Elena screamed, the secret finally tearing its way out of her throat. If he finds out I told anyone, if he finds out I went to the police or to you, he said he'd kill my mom. The hallway went silent. Domenico froze. The rage that had been boiling in his veins suddenly turned into something else, something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. He looked at Elena. He saw the sheer terror in her eyes, the way she was shaking, not for herself, but for the only family she had left. She had been enduring the beatings, the extortion, the humiliation, all to keep her mother safe. He lifted a hand and gently, so gently it felt like a ghost's touch, cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed away a tear that was tracking through the makeup on her cheek. He threatened Maria? Domenico asked, his voice dangerously calm. Elena nodded, a sob catching in her throat. He knows where she works. He watches her. He said if I missed a payment or if I talked, he would finish her. Domenico's expression darkened. a shadow passing over his face that made him look like the king of the underworld he truly was. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "Not while I'm alive," he vowed. The words were a promise, a contract, and a death sentence all in one. He pulled back, looking at her with a fierce intensity. "Go back to work, Elena. Wipe your face. Do not worry about your mother. Do not worry about Rafe. I have it handled." He let her go and turned, walking back toward his office without looking back. Elena slumped against the wall, her legs giving out, the echo of his promise ringing in her ears. Domenico moved with the precision of a general at war. Within the hour, 2 unmarked cars were stationed outside the laundry warehouse where Maria worked. He gave the order personally, unseen, unheard, but present. If anyone approached her, they were to intervene with extreme prejudice. But that wasn't enough. He needed to secure the perimeter around Elena. He waited until the sun went down. He waited until he knew she was home. The East End was a grim place at night. Streetlights flickered and buzzed like dying insects, and the pavement was slick with oil and neglect. Domenico parked his sleek black sedan 2 blocks away. Not wanting to draw attention, he walked the rest of the way, his coat collar turned up, his eyes scanning the shadows. He found her building. It was a crumbling brick tenement with peeling paint and a front door that didn't lock properly. He felt a surge of guilt. He paid his staff well, but clearly, the debts she was paying to Rafe were draining everything she had. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. He knocked on door 3B. There was a long pause, then the sound of a chain sliding back. The door opened a crack. Elena peeked out, her eyes widening when she saw him. "Mr. Bellanti, I need you to sign these," Domenico said, holding up a manila envelope. It was a lie. The envelope contained blank tax forms. Accounting made an error with your payroll. They need it fixed before the morning transfer. Elena looked confused, but she opened the door. "Oh, okay, come in." Domenico stepped inside. The apartment was tiny. It was essentially 1 room with a kitchenette in the corner, but it was clean, impeccably clean. There were fresh flowers in a chipped mug on the windowsill and a knitted blanket thrown over the worn sofa. It was a home, held together by pride and love, despite the poverty. He looked around, taking in the drafty windows that rattled in the wind, the single radiator that hissed and clanked. This was where she retreated to after a day in his palace. This was where she nursed her bruises. "I'm sorry, it's not much," Elena said, misinterpreting his silence. She was wearing oversized sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun. She looked young and vulnerable. "It is cozy." Domenico lied gently. She took the envelope and moved to the small table to sign the papers. Domenico watched her. He noticed the way she favored her right leg. He noticed the way her hands still trembled slightly. Suddenly, a crack of thunder shook the building. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the room plunged into darkness. Elena gasped. "Stay where you are." Domenico's voice came from the dark, steady and reassuring. Outside, the heavens opened up. Rain lashed against the window pane with violent force. "It's the storm," Elena said, her voice small. "The power goes out here all the time." He heard the strike of a match. A small flame flared to life, illuminating Elena's face. She lit a thick pillar candle on the table, then another on the counter. The soft, golden glow pushed back the shadows, transforming the shabby apartment into something intimate. "You should go," Elena said, turning to him, "before the storm gets worse." Domenico looked at the window. The rain was coming down in sheets. "I cannot drive in this visibility, and I am not leaving you alone in the dark in a building with no security. I'll be fine," she argued weakly. "No," he said. "I'm staying until the lights come back on." He took off his coat and draped it over the back of a chair. He walked over to the small sofa and sat down, looking perfectly at ease despite the setting. He patted the cushion beside him. "Sit. You have been on your feet all day." Elena hesitated, then sat on the opposite end of the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was charged. It was filled with the things they had said and the things they hadn't. "Thank you," she whispered after a long time. Domenico looked at her. "For what? For not forcing me to talk today. And for listening. I am not a good man, Elena," Domenico said quietly, staring at the flame of the candle. "I have done things that would give you nightmares, but I will never hurt you, and I will never let anyone else hurt you." He shifted on the couch, turning his body toward her. "You deserve better than this. Better than this apartment. Better than fear. I don't need much," she said softly. "I just want my mom to be okay." "She will be," he promised. He reached out across the cushion. His hand, large and scarred, rested palm up on the fabric between them. It was an invitation. Elena looked at his hand. It was the hand of a killer, a kingpin, a man who controlled a city, but it was also the hand that had brought her ice for her face. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out. She placed her small hand in his. Domenico's fingers closed around hers. His grip was warm and solid, engulfing her hand completely. He didn't pull her closer. He just held her there, tethering her to him. "Your hands are cold," he noted. "Yours are warm," she replied. They sat there in the dim light, the storm raging outside, the world falling apart and coming back together in the space between their palms. For the first time in years, Elena felt safe, and for the first time in his life, Domenico Bellanti felt like he had something to lose that actually mattered. "Tell me about her," Domenico said softly, thumb sweeping over her knuckles. "Tell me about your mother." And so, in the candlelight, with the rain beating a rhythm against the glass, Elena began to talk. She told him about Maria's singing, about the recipes she tried to teach Elena, about the way she laughed even when they had nothing. Domenico listened to every word, committing them to memory, knowing that he was falling into a trap of his own making and finding that he didn't want to escape. The morning light that filtered through the grime-streaked window of Elena's apartment was gray and unforgiving, the kind of light that usually signaled another day of survival. Elena blinked her eyes open, her neck stiff from sleeping at an odd angle on the sofa. The events of the previous night rushed back to her in a disorienting wave, the storm, the power outage, the hand that had held hers in the darkness. She sat up slowly, the old springs of the couch creaking beneath her. The apartment was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator that had kicked back on sometime in the night. Domenico was still there. He had moved to the wing-back chair by the door, a piece of furniture she had found on the curb and covered with a cheap throw. He looked out of place, a king sleeping on a peasant's throne. His long legs were stretched out, crossed at the ankles, and his head was tipped back against the fabric. His face, usually a mask of granite resolve, looked younger in sleep. The lines of tension around his mouth had smoothed out, and his breathing was deep and rhythmic. Elena stood up, shivering slightly in the morning chill. She grabbed the knitted afghan she had kicked off during the night and walked softly across the creaking floorboards. She hesitated for a moment, hovering over him, struck by the absurdity of the situation. The most dangerous man in Grayford City was asleep in her studio apartment, guarding the door. Gently, terrified she would wake him, she draped the blanket over his chest. His reaction was instantaneous. Before the wool even settled, his hand shot out, gripping her wrist. It wasn't painful, but it was reflexively fast, a soldier's reaction to a perceived threat. His eyes snapped open, clear and alert, devoid of sleep. "Elena," he murmured, his voice rough with morning grit. He realized who it was in a fraction of a second and loosened his grip, though he did not let go. His thumb brushed the pulse point on the inside of her wrist, which was fluttering like a trapped bird. I was just covering you," she stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It's cold." Domenico stared at her. He looked from her face to the blanket covering him, and then back to her eyes. The intensity of his gaze was overwhelming, stripping away her defenses. He wasn't looking at her like an employee, or a charity case, or a victim. He was looking at her like she was the only source of heat in a frozen world. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. Elena felt a flush rise up her neck. She pulled her hand away gently, and this time, he let her go. She turned away, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the moment, pretending to busy herself with the kettle on the stove. "I can make coffee," she said, her back to him. "It's instant, I'm sorry." "Instant is fine," Domenico said. She heard the rustle of the blanket as he stood up. The domestic spell was shattered a moment later by the harsh buzzing of a phone. Domenico reached into his pocket, his expression shifting instantly from groggy to lethal. He answered it on the second ring. "Talk." Elena watched him from the kitchenette, his posture straightened, his shoulders squaring as he listened. "Where?" Domenico asked sharply. A pause. "And you are sure it was him?" He listened for another 10 seconds, his jaw tightening until a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Understood. Keep eyes on him. Do not engage yet. I am moving the package." He hung up and looked at Elena. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculated urgency. "Pack a bag," he ordered. Elena gripped the handle of the kettle. "What? Why?" "That was Luca," Domenico said, walking toward the window and peering through the blinds. "One of my scouts spotted Rafe at the docks 2 hours ago. He was meeting with men from the cartel south of the border. He's buying weapons. Elena, serious hardware." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "Why? He's just a small-time thug." "He's desperate." Domenico turned to face her. "And desperate men do stupid, dangerous things. He's escalating. I do not know what he is planning, but I know he is not doing it alone anymore. You cannot stay here." "I have to go to work," Elena argued weakly. "I have a shift at 10. "You are done working," Domenico said flatly. "You are not going back to the estate, and you are certainly not staying in this fire trap. I am moving you to a secure location." "No," Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. She set the kettle down. "I can't just disappear. My mom, she works at the warehouse tonight. If Rafe can't find me, he'll go to her. I told you that." "I know," Domenico said. He walked over to her, stopping just outside the boundary of her personal space. "That is why we are picking her up first." Elena stared at him. "What?" "I have a safe house. It is 40 minutes north, in the hills. It is isolated, fortified, and off the books. No one knows about it but me and Luca. You and Maria will stay there until I handle this." "Handle this?" Elena repeated, the fear spiking again. "What does that mean? You promised no violence." Domenico hesitated. He looked at her wide, terrified eyes. He wanted to tell her that men like Rafe only understood one language. He wanted to tell her that violence was the only tool that would permanently sever the noose around her neck. But he saw the fragility in her, the desperate need for peace. "I will stop him," Domenico said carefully. "I will do whatever is necessary to ensure he never comes near you or your mother again. But for now, the priority is safety. Will you trust me?" Elena looked at him. She saw the holster beneath his arm, the dark circles under his eyes, and the unwavering resolve in his stance. She had spent her life running, hiding, and trembling. For the first time, someone was offering to stand in front of her. "Okay," she whispered, "but please, don't hurt him unless you have to. I don't want blood on my conscience." Domenico nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. He didn't tell her that his conscience had been stained red a long time ago, and a little more wouldn't make a difference if it meant keeping her safe. The next 48 hours were a blur of motion and tension. The extraction of Elena's mother, Maria, had been executed with military precision. Maria, a stout woman with worn hands and eyes that had seen too much hardship, had been terrified at first, but the moment she saw Domenico, not as the distant boss, but as the man carefully helping her daughter into the car, she had quieted. The safe house was a modern cabin, tucked away in a dense forest of pine and birch. It was nothing like the cold, imposing grandeur of the Bellanti estate. It was built of warm timber and glass, filled with soft rugs and comfortable furniture. The pantry was stocked. The fireplace was roaring. Before Domenico, The peace of the safe house brought a different kind of torment. He slept in the guest room down the hall from Elena and Maria for the first 2 nights. He didn't sleep at all. He sat up, his gun on the nightstand, listening to the wind in the trees, convinced every snap of a twig was Rafe coming to finish what he started. When he did finally succumb to exhaustion on the 3rd night, the dreams came. They were vivid, visceral nightmares. In them, he was always too late. He would run through endless corridors of the estate. Hearing Elena crying for help, he would burst through a door only to find her vanishing into smoke, leaving only the echo of her weeping and the dark stain of a bruise on the air. He woke up, gasping, sweat soaking his shirt, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. This was getting out of hand. He was a Belanti. He was supposed to be detached. Women were distractions, liabilities. He had never let anyone get this close, never let anyone occupy his thoughts so completely that they invaded his subconscious. But the thought of Elena in pain, the memory of her flinching from his hand, twisted something deep inside him. It wasn't just possessiveness anymore. It was terrifying. He was terrified of failing her. He washed his face with cold water, composed his features, and walked out into the main living area. It was late evening. The house was warm and smelled of garlic and roasting tomatoes. Maria had gone to bed early, exhausted from the stress of the move. Elena was in the kitchen. She was wearing a pair of flannel pajama bottoms and one of his old T-shirts that she must have found in the closet. It hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves rolled up. She was humming softly, stirring a pot of sauce on the stove. Her hair was loose, falling in dark waves down her back. She looked entirely different from the scared girl in the maid's uniform. She looked at home. Domenico leaned against the doorframe, watching her. The tension in his chest, the residue of the nightmare, began to uncoil. "It smells good," he said. Elena jumped slightly, then turned and smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners. "It's my Nona's recipe. Or, well, what I remember of it, I had to improvise with the spices. I'm sure it is better than anything my chefs make," Domenico said, walking into the room. "Don't let them hear you say that." She laughed. The sound was light, musical, and foreign to his ears. He realized he hadn't heard her laugh before. He hadn't heard anyone laugh in his presence in a very long time, without it being forced or sycophantic. "Can I help?" he asked. Elena looked at him, the Mafia Don in his casual slacks and black sweater, standing in a kitchen looking helpless. She giggled again. "You can set the table. Plates are up there." She pointed to a high cabinet. Domenico moved to the cabinet. He reached up, grabbing 2 ceramic plates. "You seem better," he noted, glancing at her over his shoulder. "I feel safe here," Elena admitted, turning back to the stove to drain the pasta. "I haven't felt safe in a long time. It's nice not to check the locks 3 times an hour." She reached for the colander, but her hand, still slick from washing vegetables, slipped on the rim of the heavy ceramic bowl she was moving. It tipped, sliding off the counter. "Oh!" Elena lunged for it. Domenico moved faster. He dropped the plates he was holding onto the table and surged forward, catching the bowl with one hand before it hit the floor and wrapping his other arm around Elena's waist to steady her. The momentum brought them crashing together. Elena gasped, her hands flying up to grip his shoulders for balance. The bowl clattered onto the counter. Silence rushed back into the room, sudden and heavy. They were standing chest to chest. Domenico's arm was still clamped firmly around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Elena's fingers were tangled in the fabric of his sweater. She looked up, her lips parted in surprise, her breath coming in short, shallow puffs. Domenico looked down at her. He saw the pulse fluttering in her throat. He saw the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. He saw the way her lips trembled slightly. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with a magnetic pull that was impossible to ignore. The smell of rain and soap that clung to her filled his senses, intoxicating him more than any alcohol ever could. He didn't think so. He couldn't think. Slowly, giving her every chance to push him away. He lowered his head. His eyes asked a question his voice couldn't form. Elena didn't push him away. Her breath hitched, and her eyelids fluttered shut. He closed the distance. His lips brushed hers. Tentative at first. A soft exploration. It was a question. Is this okay? Elena let out a soft sound, a whimper of surrender, and pressed closer to him. She rose on her tiptoes, her hands sliding up his chest to weave into the hair at the nape of his neck. That small movement broke the dam. Domenico groaned low in his throat and deepened the kiss. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was hungry, desperate. A release of all the rage and fear and longing he had been bottling up since the moment he saw the bruise on her cheek. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air. One of his hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, while the other pressed her closer, needing to feel every inch of her against him. Elena matched his intensity, opening to him, her fear forgotten in the heat of his touch. For a moment, there was nothing else in the world. No Rafe, no Mafia, no danger. Just the fire between them. But then, Domenico's hand shifted, sliding down her back to her hip, gripping her tighter. The sudden restriction, the feeling of being held too firmly, triggered a memory. A flash of an alleyway, a rough hand, a feeling of being trapped. Elena froze. Her body went rigid in his arms. She gasped, not in passion, but in a sudden, sharp intake of panic. She pulled her lips away, burying her face in his shoulder. I can't, she whispered, her voice trembling violently. I'm not ready. Domenico stopped instantly. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The hunger vanished, replaced immediately by a fierce, protective restraint. He didn't pull away in anger. He didn't sigh in frustration. He simply froze, his body becoming a pillar of stone to support her. He loosened his grip on her waist immediately, leaving his hands resting lightly, reassuringly, on her arms. He took a deep breath, steadying his own racing heart, and rested his chin on the top of her head. "You don't have to be," he said firmly. His voice was raspy, but there was no hesitation in it. "We stop. Right now. We stop." Elena was shaking against him. "I'm sorry. I just—" "Do not apologize," Domenico murmured into her hair. He moved his hands to cup her face, lifting it gently so she had to look at him. His thumbs stroked her cheekbones, wiping away the beginnings of tears. "Elena, look at me. You never have to apologize for saying no. Not to me. Never to me." She looked at him, searching for any sign of the anger she was used to seeing in men when they were denied. She found only patience, and something else, something soft and terrifyingly open. "Okay," she breathed, her shoulders sagging as the panic receded. Domenico kissed her forehead, a chaste, lingering pressure that felt more intimate than the passionate kiss moments before. "Let's eat. The pasta is getting cold." They ate in a comfortable silence, the tension dissipating into a warm, quiet companionship. After dinner, they moved to the large leather sofa in front of the fireplace. The storm that had threatened earlier had arrived, rain lashing against the tall glass windows of the cabin. Elena sat close to him. Tucked into the corner of the sofa, Domenico sat beside her, his arms stretched out along the back of the seat. Slowly, tentatively, Elena shifted. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady, strong thrum of his heart. Domenico didn't move for a second, afraid to spook her. Then he lowered his arm, wrapping it around her shoulders, pulling her into the shelter of his body. She curled her legs up, resting her hand on his chest, right over his heart. They stayed like that for a long time, watching the flames dance in the hearth. It was a scene of domestic peace that belonged to a different life, a life neither of them had ever thought they would have. Domenico rested his cheek against her hair, inhaling the scent of her. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that there was no going back from this. He wasn't just protecting an asset anymore. He wasn't just helping an employee. He was holding his entire world in his arms. "No one will hurt you again," he whispered into the silence, the vow vibrating through his chest and into hers. Elena closed her eyes, drifting towards sleep, believing him. But outside, in the dark, wet woods, the wind howled like a warning. Domenico stared into the fire, his eyes hard. He knew that promises were easy to make in the quiet of a safe house. Keeping them would require war, and he was ready to burn the whole city down to keep the woman in his arms safe. The silence of the safe house was a deception, while the cabin in the woods felt like a sanctuary, removed from the grime and noise of Grayford City. The war Domenico had paused was beginning to bleed through the edges. It started with a phone call from Luca on a Tuesday afternoon. Domenico took it on the porch, watching the rain drip from the eaves of the cedar roof. As he listened, his expression did not change, but the temperature around him seemed to drop. Rafe and his associates were no longer content with hiding in the shadows. They were making noise. That morning, the staff at the Bellanti-owned laundromat in the East End, the same warehouse where Maria had worked for 10 years, arrived to find the windows shattered. Shards of glass littered the folding tables. Violent red spray paint covered the brick facade, spelling out crude insults and specific threats directed at the Bellanti family. It was not just vandalism. It was a challenge. It was a message that said, "We know where you live, and we are not afraid to break things." Domenico ended the call and walked back inside. He found Elena sitting by the fireplace, reading a paperback. She looked up, her eyes instantly locking onto the tension in his jaw. She had learned to read him better than his own lieutenants. "What happened?" she asked, setting the book down. Domenico hesitated. He wanted to lie. He wanted to keep this world of brutality away from her. But he had promised her honesty. "Rafe's men," he said, keeping his voice even. "They vandalized the laundromat this morning." "Broken windows, graffiti." Elena stood up, her hand flying to her mouth. "The girls, Mrs. Higgins, was anyone hurt?" "No one was hurt," Domenico assured her quickly, stepping forward to bridge the distance between them. "The building was empty. It was a scare tactic. Elena, nothing more." "It's my fault," she whispered, sinking back onto the sofa, her face pale. "He's doing this to get to me. He's hurting innocent people because I ran away. He's doing this because he is a rabid dog who knows he is cornered." Domenico corrected her, his voice hardening. He crouched in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "Do not take responsibility for the actions of a madman. This is not on you. Please," she begged, gripping his fingers, "just leave it alone. If you push back, he'll escalate. He'll hurt someone for real next time. Just wait. Maybe he'll get bored. Maybe he'll move on." Domenico looked at her. He saw the desperate hope in her eyes, the pacifism born of a lifetime of trying to survive by being invisible. He knew Rafe would never move on. Men like that did not stop until they were put down. "I will wait." Domenico lied. It was a smooth, necessary untruth. "I will not make a move yet. We will stay here, and we will let him bark at the walls." Elena breathed out a sigh of relief, her shoulders dropping. "Thank you." Domenico squeezed her hands, then stood up. "I have to make a call to the insurance company." He walked into the kitchen, out of her earshot, and dialed Luca immediately. "Double the patrols," he whispered into the phone, his eyes fixed on the dark tree line outside the window. "And find out where Rafe is sleeping. I want a team ready to move on my command. We are not waiting for him to get bored. We are waiting for him to make a mistake." Life in the safe house fell into a rhythm that was almost domestic, a strange counterpoint to the violence brewing in the city. Maria, though worried about her workplace, had settled into the guest room. She was a sharp woman, observant in the quiet way of mothers who had spent years watching their children try to hide pain. She watched Elena now. She watched the way her daughter moved around the cabin, no longer hunching her shoulders to make herself smaller, no longer flinching at sudden noises. She saw the color returning to Elena's cheeks, but mostly, she watched Domenico. She saw the way the Mafia Boss's eyes followed Elena when she walked across the room. She saw the way he anticipated her needs before she spoke them, pouring her water, adjusting the thermostat, finding a blanket, that evening, while Elena was showering. Maria found Domenico on the back deck. He was smoking a cigarette, the ember glowing bright in the twilight. "You're good for her," Maria said, stepping out into the cool air. Domenico turned. Flicking ash over the railing, he offered her a respectful nod. She's good for herself. Maria. She's stronger than you think. I know how strong she is, Maria said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I watched her carry the weight of the world so I wouldn't have to, but I have never seen her smile like this. Not in years. She looked at him pointedly. You're a dangerous man, Mr. Belanti. Everyone in Grayford knows this, but you do not look at my daughter like a dangerous man. Domenico took a long drag of the cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke that twisted into the night air. No, I suppose I don't. Just promise me one thing, Maria said, her voice fierce. Do not break her heart. She has survived bruises and broken bones. I do not think she can survive a broken heart. Not from you. I would sooner cut out my own heart, Domenico said. The gravity in his voice made Maria pause. She nodded once, satisfied, and went back inside. Later. Domenico stood by the railing as Luca pulled up the driveway in an unmarked supply van. They spoke in hushed tones while unloading crates of food. You are different, boss, Luca noted, handing him a box of fresh produce. You are distracted. Not distracted, Domenico corrected. He looked toward the lit window of the cabin where he could see Elena's silhouette moving. Awake, for the first time in years. He leaned against the van, his guard down for a fleeting second. She's not like the women we are used to, Luca. They want the money, or the power, or the thrill. She hates all of it. She looks at me and she does not see the dawn. She sees a man. She makes me want to be decent. Luca looked at him, surprised by the confession, then nodded solemnly. Then we better make sure she stays safe, because a decent man has a lot to lose. The night was heavy with rain again. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows across the living room rug. Elena sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, staring into the dying light. Domenico sat on the sofa behind her, his hand resting absently on her shoulder. They had been talking for hours about small things, childhood memories, favorite songs, but the conversation had slowly spiraled inward, toward the dark places they both tried to ignore. He liked to teach lessons, Elena said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, brittle. Domenico's hand stopped moving. He didn't speak. He just waited, offering his silence as a safe space for her words. The worst night wasn't when he hit me, she continued, her eyes fixed on a red coal in the fireplace. It was about 6 months ago. I was 5 minutes late meeting him. I had missed the bus. He didn't yell. He just smiled and said I needed to learn obedience. She took a shaky breath. He drove me to the industrial district, to an alley behind the old cannery. It was pitch black. He pushed me out of the car and took my phone and my wallet. He said, "If you can find your way home, you can keep your job." And then he drove away. Domenico's grip on her shoulder tightened. Just a fraction. His blood was turning to ice. I was alone in the dark for 4 hours, Elena whispered, a tear tracking down her cheek. There were men, shadows. I had to hide in a dumpster. I had to crawl through trash to keep from being seen. I was so scared I couldn't even cry. I thought I was going to die there. She turned her head, resting her cheek against his knee. That was when I knew he didn't love me. He liked owning me, and he liked breaking me. Domenico stared at the wall above her head. The rage that filled him was not the hot, explosive anger of a street fight. It was a cold, absolute void. It was the kind of rage that toppled empires. He imagined Rafe driving away, leaving this gentle, terrified woman in the dark. He imagined her hiding in the filth, trembling. He slid off the sofa, moving to sit on the floor beside her. He took her face in his hands, his touch reverent, as if she were made of holy glass. He wiped the tear from her cheek with his thumb. He's already dead, Domenico said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of any doubt. I just haven't buried him yet. Elena looked into his eyes and saw the violence there, but for the first time, it didn't frighten her, because it stood between her and the dark. The mood shifted the next evening. The storm had broken. Leaving the air crisp and clean, Domenico brought an old transistor radio down from the attic and set it on the kitchen counter, tuning it until the static cleared and the soulful, brassy notes of slow jazz filled the room. They were cooking dinner together again. It had become their ritual. Domenico was chopping vegetables with a precision that betrayed his comfort with a blade, while Elena stirred a risotto on the stove. The song changed to a slow, mournful trumpet solo. Domenico set the knife down. He wiped his hands on a towel and walked up behind Elena. She felt his presence before he touched her. The heat of his body radiated against her back. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "Dance with me," he murmured against her skin. Elena turned in his arms, a smile playing on her lips. "The rice will burn." "Let it burn," Domenico said. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers, and placed his other hand on the small of her back. They moved slowly around the small kitchen, swaying to the music. There was no intricate choreography, just two bodies moving in sync. Elena looked up at him. The harsh overhead light had been dimmed. The only illumination came from the under-cabinet lights and the glow of the stove. In the soft light, Domenico looked devastating. "You're staring," he teased softly. "I'm memorizing," she replied, her voice bold. Domenico's eyes darkened. He stopped moving. He released her hand and brought his fingers to her chin, tilting her face up. He kissed her. It wasn't like the first time. There was no hesitation now. It was deep, languid, and possessed a certainty that stole her breath. His tongue brushed against hers, tasting, claiming. Elena made a soft sound in her throat and pressed herself closer, her hands sliding up his chest to grip the lapels of his shirt. The kiss deepened, growing hungrier. Domenico backed her up until her lower back hit the edge of the counter. He didn't stop. He lifted her effortlessly, his hands gripping her waist, setting her onto the marble surface so they were eye level. He stepped between her knees, his body pressing against hers. He broke the kiss to trail his lips down her jawline, finding the sensitive spot beneath her ear. Elena threw her head back, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. "Domenico," she gasped. He pulled back, his breathing ragged. His eyes searched hers, asking the question without words. "Is this okay? Are you with me?" Elena looked at him, at the man who had protected her, who had listened to her trauma without judging, who had treated her like a queen in a cabin in the woods. She reached out and pulled him back to her. "Don't stop," she whispered against his lips. "Don't stop until I tell you." Domenico groaned, a sound of pure worship. He kissed her collarbone, his hands moving slowly, telegraphing every touch before he made it. He was careful, so careful, letting her guide the pace. When his hand slid up her thigh, he watched her eyes, looking for any sign of fear. He found only desire. The risotto was forgotten. The jazz played onto an empty room as he carried her down the hall. They fell asleep tangled together, a knot of limbs and sheets. The room was cool, but beneath the heavy down duvet, it was warm. Elena was asleep on her side, her back pressed against Domenico's chest. Her hand was still clutching the fabric of his shirt, which he had discarded on the floor but she had somehow found in the night. Domenico lay awake, listening to her breathing. His arm was draped possessively over her waist, holding her anchored to him. He felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. He kissed her shoulder, the skin soft and warm. "This is it," he thought. "This is the life I want." He closed his eyes, allowing himself to drift off, believing that the war was outside the walls, that he had time. But time was a luxury men like him could not afford. The phone rang at 6 a.m. It cut through the silence like a siren. Domenico was awake instantly. He rolled away from Elena, grabbing the phone from the nightstand before the second ring could wake her. She stirred, mumbling something unintelligible, and buried her face in the pillow. Domenico walked into the hallway, closing the bedroom door softly. "Report," he said, his voice gravelly with sleep. "Boss." Luca's voice was tight, panicked. "It's Maria. Domenico felt his stomach drop. "She is in the guest room. I saw her go to bed." "Check the room, Domenico," Luca said. "Check it now." Domenico moved. He pushed open the door to the guest bedroom. The bed was made. The window was unlatched. A note sat on the pillow. "I cannot sit here while my friends are in trouble. I am going to the warehouse to check the damage. I will be back before you wake up. Do not be angry. M. She's gone," Domenico said, crushing the phone in his hand. "We have eyes on the warehouse," Luca said, his voice breaking. Rafe was waiting. He knew she would come. He knew she was loyal to that place. "They took her 10 minutes ago. They put her in a van." Domenico stood in the hallway of the safe house. The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the trees, casting golden light onto the floorboards where he and Elena had danced hours before. The peace was gone. The sanctuary was breached. "Where?" Domenico asked. His voice was no longer human. It was the sound of a predator that had smelled blood. "The old train yards," Luca replied. "Warehouse 4. Domenico hung up. He turned back toward the bedroom where Elena lay sleeping, dreaming of safety. He would have to wake her. He would have to tell her that her worst nightmare had come true. And then he was going to burn the world down. The morning mist clinging to the pines outside the safe house was no longer picturesque. It was a shroud. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with the suffocating weight of panic. Elena stood by the heavy oak door, her knuckles white as she gripped the fabric of Domenico's jacket. Her face was pale, stripped of the color that had returned over the last few days, and her eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond her own safety. "I'm coming with you," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "She's my mother, Domenico. I can talk to him. I can distract him." Domenico Bellanti stood like a monolith in the center of the entryway. He was fastening a Kevlar vest over his chest, his movements precise and mechanical. He looked at her, and the mask of the ruthlessly efficient Don slipped just enough to reveal the torment beneath. "No," he said. The word was absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. "You are staying here with the guards. If you step foot outside this cabin, you become a liability. I cannot watch Rafe and watch you at the same time." "But he'll kill her," Elena cried, tears spilling over. "He doesn't want her. He wants money. He wants me." Domenico finished securing the vest and pulled a dark button-down shirt over it, concealing the armor. He reached out, grabbing Elena by the shoulders, his grip firm enough to ground her. "He wants to hurt you," Domenico corrected her, his voice low and fierce. "And the best way to do that is to make you watch. I will not give him that satisfaction. I am going to get Maria. I am going to bring her back to this doorstep. Do you hear me?" Elena shook her head, sobbing. "You don't know that. You can't promise that." "I can," he vowed. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers for a singular, heart-stopping second. "I promise you. Elena, I will bring her back." He pulled away before the warmth of her skin could weaken his resolve. He turned to the door, where Luca was waiting with the engine of the SUV running. Domenico walked out into the cold morning air, leaving the only thing he loved behind to face the thing he hated. The drive to the city was a blur of gray asphalt and silent fury. Luca drove with white-knuckled intensity, weaving through traffic as they descended from the hills and entered the industrial sprawl of Grayford's train yards. Domenico sat in the passenger seat, checking his weapon, a matte black semi-automatic. He slid it into the holster at his hip. Then he reached into the center console and pulled out a slender, unrecognizable object. It was a blade, thin and razor-sharp, sheathed in black leather. He strapped it to his forearm, hidden beneath the cuff of his shirt. "We have him pinned," Luca said, breaking the silence. "Warehouse 4. It's an old rolling stock repair depot, abandoned for 10 years. My guys say there are 3 heat signatures inside. Rafe, the mother, and 2 others." "2 others," Domenico repeated. "Hired muscle." "Likely," Luca agreed. "Boss, we have a tactical team 5 minutes out. We should wait for them. We can breach from the roof." "No time," Domenico said, his eyes fixed on the looming skeletons of the cranes in the distance. "Rafe is unstable. If he sees a tactical team, he executes Maria just to make a point. This has to be surgical. As they pulled up to the rusted chain-link fence of the train yard, Domenico's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered it, putting it on speaker. "Belanti," Rafe's voice crackled through the line. It was high-pitched, manic, the voice of a man running on adrenaline and bad choices. "I see your car. Nice ride. Shame you brought a driver." "Let her go." "Rafe," Domenico said calmly. "You want money? I can wire you enough to disappear to a non-extradition country right now. Just open the door and walk away." Rafe laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. "Money? I don't want your charity. King of Greyford, I want respect. I want you to bleed. Come inside. Alone. If I see anyone else, if I see even a shadow of one of your goons, the old lady gets a bullet in the brain." The line went dead. Domenico stared at the phone, then looked at Luca. "You heard him," Domenico said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Boss, no," Luca protested, grabbing his arm. "It's a trap. He's going to kill you the second you walk through that door. Let me send the shooters in." Domenico looked at his right-hand man. "He has a gun to her head. Luca, if we storm the place, Maria dies. Elena will never forgive me, and I will never forgive myself." He opened the door and stepped out into the gravel and weeds. The wind smelled of rust and impending rain. "Stay here," Domenico ordered. "If I am not out in 15 minutes, burn the place to the ground." Warehouse 4 was a cavernous tomb of steel and concrete. The windows were high and shattered, letting in shafts of dusty light that cut through the gloom. The air was cold and smelled of stagnant oil. Domenico walked in through the main sliding door, his hands held out at his sides, palms open. He walked with a steady, predatory grace, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. "I am here," he called out. His voice did not echo with fear. It commanded the space. "Keep walking," Rafe screamed from the shadows. "Center of the room," Domenico obliged. He stopped in a patch of light, scanning the darkness. Slowly, figures emerged from behind a stack of rusted shipping crates. Rafe Santoro looked worse than his mugshot. His eyes were wild, rimmed with red, and he was sweating despite the chill. He had one arm hooked around Maria's neck, dragging her forward. In his other hand, he pressed a pistol against her temple. Maria was weeping silently, her face bruised, her hands bound with zip ties. When she saw Domenico, she let out a choked sob of relief and terror. Flanking Rafe were two large men holding shotguns. They looked like cheap mercenaries, hired thugs who thought this was an easy payday. "Look at you," Rafe sneered, tightening his grip on Maria. "The big bad wolf. You don't look so scary without your pack." "I came alone, as you asked," Domenico said, his eyes flicking to the hired guns and then locking onto Rafe. "Let the woman go. She's nothing to you." "She's leveraged," Rafe shouted, spitting on the floor. "She's the reason you're standing there and not putting a bullet in me. And where is Elena? Hiding? Did she send her boyfriend to clean up her mess?" "Elena is safe," Domenico said softly, "far away from you." "She belongs to me," Rafe roared, the gun shaking in his hand. "She thinks she can just walk away, after everything I did for her." "You broke her," Domenico said, taking a slow step forward. "You terrorized her. You are not a man. Rafe, you are a disease." "Stay back," Rafe shrieked, jamming the barrel harder into Maria's temple. She cried out in pain. Domenico froze. He calculated the distance. 30 feet. Too far to rush. He needed to even the odds. He looked at the two mercenaries. "He cannot pay you," Domenico said to them, his voice calm and authoritative. "Whatever he promised you, he does not have it. I am Domenico Belanti. Walk away now, and you live. Stay, and you die." The men exchanged a nervous glance. The name Belanti carried weight in this city. It carried the weight of graveyards. "Don't listen to him," Rafe yelled. "Shoot him. Shoot him in the legs." The man on the left raised his shotgun. Domenico moved. He didn't run away. He dove forward, rolling behind a rusted forklift just as the shotgun blasted, peppering the metal with buckshot. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. "Kill him!" Rafe screamed, dragging Maria back toward the office at the rear of the warehouse. The two mercenaries advanced on the forklift, racking their slides. Domenico waited. He breathed in, focusing his mind. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he had something they didn't. He had a reason to fight that burned hotter than greed. The first mercenary rounded the corner of the forklift. Domenico surged up from a crouch, grabbing the barrel of the shotgun and wrenching it upward. The gun went off, blowing a hole in the roof. In the same motion, Domenico drove his palm into the man's nose, shattering the cartilage. The man stumbled back, blinded by pain. Domenico spun, delivering a crushing kick to the man's knee. Snapping it backward, the mercenary went down, screaming. The second man hesitated. Seeing his partner fall, that hesitation cost him his life. Domenico closed the distance, dodging a clumsy swing of the shotgun butt. He landed a series of brutal, precise punches to the man's ribs and throat. The mercenary gagged, dropping the weapon to clutch his crushed windpipe. Domenico finished him with a heavy blow to the temple, knocking him unconscious. It had taken less than 20 seconds. Domenico straightened his jacket, breathing hard, and turned toward the rear of the warehouse. Rafe was standing on the metal gantry platform above the office, dragging Maria with him. He was backed into a corner, nowhere left to run. "Don't come up here," Rafe screamed. "I swear to God, I'll do it." Domenico walked to the stairs and climbed them slowly, step by step. The metal rang out like a death knell. He reached the top of the platform. Rafe was pressing himself against the railing, using Maria as a human shield. The gun was trembling violently against her head. "It is over, Rafe," Domenico said. He stopped 10 feet away. He held his hands up again. "You have nowhere to go. Your men are down. The police are coming. My men are outside. I'm taking her with me," Rafe sobbed, his bravado crumbling into hysterical fear. "I'm taking her out." "No," Domenico said. He lowered his hands slowly. "Take me instead." Rafe blinked, confusion warring with panic. "What? You hate me," Domenico said, stepping closer. "I am the one who took Elena away. I am the one who humiliated you. I am the prize. Rafe, imagine the reputation you would have, the man who killed Domenico Bellanti." He stopped 5 feet away. "Let her go. She's just a maid. I am the king. Trade up." Rafe stared at him. The logic twisted in his desperate mind. Killing the mother was petty. Killing Bellanti, that was legendary. "Get on your knees," Rafe hissed. "Let her go first," Domenico countered. Rafe shoved Maria hard. She stumbled forward, falling to her knees on the metal grating. She scrambled away, weeping, crawling toward the stairs. "Run, Maria," Domenico said without looking at her. "Go." Rafe swung the gun toward Domenico's chest. A smirk twisted his lips, ugly and triumphant. "You're an idiot. You really think she loves you? She's just using you to get away from me." "She loves me," Domenico said quietly, "because I would die for her. Would you?" Rafe's finger tightened on the trigger. "Say goodbye, King." Domenico didn't wait for the pull. He flicked his wrist, the mechanism on his forearm engaged, and the 4-inch blade shot into his hand in a motion faster than thought. He swiped his arm upward. The blade caught Rafe's wrist. Rafe screamed as the steel sliced through tendons. His hand jerked reflexively, and the gun went off. Bang! The sound tore through the warehouse. From the stairs, Maria screamed, "No!" The bullet went wild, ricocheting off the metal rafters above their heads. Rafe dropped the gun, clutching his bleeding wrist, his eyes wide with shock. He scrambled backward, slipping on the wet grating. Domenico did not hesitate. There was no speech, no final judgment. He lunged forward, grabbing Rafe by the collar of his jacket. Rafe tried to swing a fist, but Domenico caught it effortlessly. Domenico drove him back against the railing. He looked into Rafe's eyes and saw the fear there, the sudden realization that he was small, weak, and mortal. "For Elena," Domenico whispered. He drove the hidden blade into Rafe's chest, piercing the heart. It was a single, clean strike. Savage, but efficient, Rafe gasped, his eyes glazing over. Domenico held him there for a moment, watching the life fade, ensuring the threat was extinguished. Then he let go. Rafe Santoro crumpled to the floor, silent and still. Domenico stood over him, his breath coming in ragged heaves. He wiped the blade on his trousers and retracted it. He checked himself. No bullet holes, just bruises. He turned around. Maria was huddled at the top of the stairs, staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. Domenico walked over to her. He knelt down, his demeanor instantly changing from executioner to protector. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife to cut the zip ties on her wrists. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. "No," Maria whispered, rubbing her wrists. She looked over his shoulder at the body. "Is he—" "He's gone," Domenico said firmly. "He will never hurt either of you again. Come, let's get you home." He helped her stand, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to give out. They walked down the metal stairs, past the groaning mercenaries, and out into the light. Luca was waiting by the door, gun drawn. When he saw them, he lowered the weapon, letting out a long breath. "Car," Domenico ordered. "Now." The drive back to the safe house was silent. Maria slept in the back seat, exhaustion finally claiming her. Domenico drove this time, needing the focus of the road to quiet the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. When they turned onto the gravel driveway of the cabin, the sun was high in the sky, burning off the mist. Before the car even came to a full stop, the front door of the cabin flew open. Elena ran out. She was barefoot, stumbling over the rocks, her face streaked with dried tears. Domenico put the car in park and stepped out. "Mom!" Elena screamed, pulling the back door open. Maria woke with a start, stumbling out into her daughter's arms. The two women collapsed against each other, sobbing, a tangle of hair and relief. Domenico stood back, leaning against the hood of the car, watching them. He felt a heavy, aching exhaustion settle into his bones. After a long moment, Maria pulled back, kissing Elena's face, and pointed toward Domenico. She whispered something to her daughter. Elena turned. Her eyes found him. She saw the blood on his shirt. Not his, but she didn't know that yet. She saw the exhaustion in his posture. She saw the man who had walked into hell alone because he had promised her he would. "Domenico!" She breathed. She ran to him. She didn't slow down. She crashed into him with the force of a freight train. Domenico caught her, wrapping his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground as she buried her face in his neck. She was shaking violently. "You're alive!" she sobbed into his skin. "You're alive! You're alive!" "I promised," he rasped, burying his face in her hair. "I told you I would come back." She pulled back, framing his face with her hands, her thumbs tracing the sharp line of his jaw. She looked for the darkness she feared might have consumed him, but she found only him. She kissed him. It wasn't a soft kiss or a gentle one. It was fierce and desperate, tasting of salt tears and survival. It was a claim. Domenico kissed her back, holding her so tight he thought he might break her ribs, but she didn't pull away. She held him just as hard. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting against each other. Maria was standing by the porch, watching them with a tired smile. Safe at last. Domenico looked at Elena. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just held her there in the sunlight, surrounded by the quiet trees, anchoring her to the earth. Rafe was dead. The threat was gone. And for the first time in his life, Domenico Bellanti wasn't thinking about the next fight. He was thinking that he was finally, truly home. 3 days after the nightmare at the warehouse, the sky over Grayford City finally cleared. The relentless gray clouds that had suffocated the skyline for weeks broke apart, revealing a sun that felt bright and new. It was fitting weather for a resurrection. Domenico Bellanti stood on the sidewalk of a quiet, tree-lined street in the North District, a neighborhood where the sirens were rare and the lawns were manicured with precision. Behind him stood a charming, 2-story brick townhouse with a wrought iron gate and flower boxes that were waiting to be filled. He held the keys in his hand, the metal warm against his palm. Maria stood next to him, clutching a canvas tote bag, her eyes wide and watery. She looked from the house to Domenico, and then to her daughter. This is too much, Mr. Bellanti," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "We cannot accept this." "The rent must be—" "There is no rent, Maria," Domenico said gently. He placed the keys in her worn hand and closed her fingers over them. "The deed is in your name. It is not a gift. It is a debt repaid. You raised the woman who saved my life." Maria looked confused. "Saved your life? But you saved us." Domenico looked at Elena, who was standing by the porch steps. She was wearing a simple sundress he had bought for her, the bruises on her arms fading to faint yellow shadows. She looked lighter, as if gravity had released its hold on her. "She saved me in ways that do not involve guns," Domenico murmured. He walked over to Elena. She was tracing the grain of the oak front door. She turned as he approached, a shy smile playing on her lips. "It has a garden," she said. Her voice filled with wonder. "Mom always wanted a garden." "It has a security system, too," Domenico added, his protective instincts never fully sleeping, "and a patrol car that will pass by every hour. You are safe here. Elena, no one gets within a mile of this house without my permission." Elena looked up at him. The shadow of fear that had haunted her eyes for years was gone, replaced by a profound, quiet gratitude. "Thank you for everything." "Do not thank me," he said, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "Just live. Be happy. That is all I ask." But happiness in the world of the Bellanti family was never without its complications. While Elena and Maria settled into their new life of peace, the undercurrents of Domenico's criminal empire were beginning to churn. Later that week, Domenico sat at the head of the long obsidian table in the boardroom of the Bellanti estate. The air was thick with cigar smoke and unspoken judgment. 6 of his top captains sat around him, men who had served his father and his grandfather. They were old school, hardened by decades of violence and rigid codes of conduct. Salvio, the oldest of them, leaned forward. He was a man with skin like leather and eyes like flint. "There is talk. Domenico," Salvio rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "Talk that you are losing focus. You handled the Santoro mess personally. You risked your life for a housemaid's daughter. This emotion, it makes us look weak. It makes you look vulnerable." Domenico did not flinch. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching the light catch the crystal. He let the silence stretch, making them wait, making them sweat. "Weak," Domenico repeated softly. He stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. He walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds of his estate. "You think strength is only about bullets and territory," Domenico said, turning to face them. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a guillotine blade. "You think a leader must be a machine, devoid of blood and heart. That is why the families before us crumbled. They forgot what they were fighting for." He walked back to the table. Placing his hands on the cold stone surface, he looked each man in the eye, daring them to challenge him. "Elena Rossetti is not a distraction. She's the reason I am going to build an empire that lasts. Because for the first time, I have something worth coming home to. And if any of you have a problem with who I choose to protect, you can leave your rings on the table and walk out that door." Silence descended on the room. Heavy. Absolute silence. Salvio stared at him for a long moment, then, slowly, the old man nodded. It was a nod of respect. He saw the fire in Domenico's eyes, a new kind of fire. It wasn't just ambition anymore. It was conviction. "Understood, Don Bellanti," Salvio said. Domenico straightened his jacket. "Good. Now, let's discuss the shipping lanes." That evening, Elena was waiting for him in the library. She had been staying at the estate for a few days while the final furniture was moved into her mother's new house. She was standing in front of a massive oil painting of Domenico's great-grandfather, a stern-looking man holding a cane like a weapon. She didn't hear Domenico enter. He watched her for a moment, struck by the contrast of her soft silhouette against the rigid history of his family. "He looks angry," Elena said without turning around, sensing his presence. "He was a miserable man," Domenico replied, walking over to stand beside her. "He had everything, and he enjoyed nothing." Elena turned to him. She looked down at her hands, twisting a silver ring he had given her. "Domenico." I heard the guards talking. I know your family isn't happy about me, about us. Domenico's jaw tightened. They do not have a vote. But they're right, she whispered, looking up at him with wide, anxious eyes. Look at this place. Look at you. You're a king in this city. You run everything, and I'm just a maid's daughter. I scrubbed these floors. Domenico, I don't belong in your world. Domenico reached out, taking her face in his hands. The contact was electric, grounding her instantly. My world? He scoffed gently. My world is full of snakes, sycophants, and people who want to take what I have. It is a cold, lonely place. Elena. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. You are the only one who ever walked into this house and saw the man under the crown. You didn't want my money. You didn't want my protection. You just wanted me to be kind. You are the only thing in this world that is real. I'm afraid I'll let you down, she confessed, a tear slipping free. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't need a queen, Domenico whispered, kissing the tear away. I just need you. The next morning, he took her away. He drove north, past the city limits, past the suburbs, into the deep, untouched wilderness that bordered the state line. He took her to his private lake house, a place even more secluded than the safe house. It was a structure of glass and stone cantilevered over a pristine, mirror-still lake. There were no guards here, no staff, just the sound of water lapping against the dock and the wind singing through the pines. No phones, Domenico said, tossing his cell onto the entryway table. No business. Just us. For 2 days, they lived in a bubble of peace. They walked along the shoreline, skipping stones across the water. They cooked together, drinking wine on the deck as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. On the second night, the air turned crisp. Domenico built a fire in the master bedroom's hearth. The room was bathed in the soft, flickering glow of candlelight and burning oak. Elena sat on the edge of the massive bed, wearing a silk robe he had bought for her. She watched him stoke the fire, the muscles of his back shifting under his shirt. Domenico, she said softly. He turned, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. He walked over to her, kneeling on the rug between her knees. He looked up at her with a reverence that made her heart ache. You've been so patient, Elena whispered, running her fingers through his hair. You saved me. You gave my mother a home. You brought me here. And you've never asked for anything in return. You never pushed me. Even when I froze. Domenico took her hand, kissing her palm. I told you, Elena, I do not want to own you. I want to love you. There is a difference. She looked at him, seeing the absolute truth in his gaze, the fear that had defined her life for so long, the fear of men, the fear of touch, the fear of being used, finally shattered. It lay in pieces on the floor, irrelevant. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she said, her voice steady. I want to be yours. Domenico stood up slowly. He lifted her chin with a gentle finger, his eyes searching hers for any hesitation. I would wait forever if it meant you would feel safe in my arms. Are you sure? I'm sure, she breathed. He kissed her. It was a slow, devastatingly tender kiss that promised everything. He lowered her back onto the pillows, his weight settling over her like a protective shield. The night became a blur of sensation. It was not a taking, but a giving. Domenico worshipped her with a slowness that bordered on agony. He touched her as if she were made of something precious and fragile, yet he held her with a strength that told her he would never let her fall. Every touch was a question, and every sigh from her lips was an answer. When skin met skin, it was a reclamation. Elena realized that her body was no longer a site of trauma. It was her own again, shared willingly with the man who had helped her heal. There were tears. Tears of release, of relief, of overwhelming emotion. Domenico kissed them away, murmuring promises against her throat, telling her she was beautiful. She was safe. She was home. In the quiet hours of the night, with the fire crackling low, they lay tangled together. Elena rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. knowing that this heart beat for her alone. A week later, back at the estate, Elena sat at the antique desk in the morning room. The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the paper in front of her. She was writing a letter to her mother. Dearest Mom, I am sending this with Luca because I wanted you to know before I come over for Sunday dinner. I woke up this morning and realized something strange. The knot in my stomach, the one that has been there since I was 19, is gone. I look in the mirror and I don't see the girl who is afraid of the dark anymore. I see someone new, someone who is loved. Domenico treats me like I am the most important thing in the world. He's teaching me how to drive and how to shoot. Just for targets. Don't worry. And how to be brave. I am finally happy. Mom, I am finally free. And for the first time in my life, I am not scared anymore. I love you, Elena. She folded the letter and sealed it. She looked out the window at the gardens, where the roses were just beginning to bloom. A smile touched her lips, a real, unfettered smile. In the West Wing, inside the mahogany-lined office, Domenico was handling his own correspondence. But he wasn't writing letters. He was destroying the past. A metal waste bin sat in the center of the room. A fire burned brightly inside it. Domenico stood over it, holding a thick file folder. The label read, Santoro, R, alongside other names, men who had been threats, blackmailers, ghosts of the old life. He opened the folder one last time. He looked at the photos of the damage Rafe had caused, the police reports, the sordid history of pain. He didn't feel anger anymore. He felt nothing for these men. They were dust. He dropped the file into the flames. He watched the paper curl and blacken. He watched the name Santoro turn to ash and float up the chimney. It was done. He was cleaning the house. There would be no shadows in Elena's future, only light. He poured a glass of water over the ashes to ensure they were extinguished, then buttoned his jacket. He had somewhere better to be. Domenico walked up the grand staircase, his footsteps silent on the plush runner. He moved toward the master bedroom, the door slightly ajar. He pushed it open quietly. Elena was standing by the tall window that overlooked the estate grounds. She was wearing one of his white dress shirts, the fabric swallowing her small frame, making her look delicate and undeniably his. She was brushing her long, dark hair, the rhythmic motion soothing in the quiet afternoon light. She paused, looking at her reflection in the glass, and then she saw him standing behind her in the reflection. She didn't jump. She didn't flinch. Her eyes met his in the glass, and her expression softened into a look of pure love. Domenico walked up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of lavender and peace. Elena leaned back into him, closing her eyes, covering his hands with hers. "I was thinking," she murmured, her voice dreamy. "Maybe we should go visit my mom tonight. She's making lasagna. We can go wherever you want." Domenico rumbled against her skin. "I don't want to go anywhere else," she whispered. "I used to dream about running away, about leaving the city and never coming back." Domenico kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear, his hold on her tightening possessively. "You're not leaving," he whispered again. The words a vow rather than a command this time, "because you're home now." Elena smiled, turning in his arms to kiss him, the sun setting over Grayford City, casting long shadows that could no longer touch them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Domenico and Elena as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. It's a tale about how love can grow in the darkest of places, and how trust is the most powerful weapon of all. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you want to hear more intense, emotional, and romantic tales like this one, please make sure to hit that subscribe button for Mafia romance stories and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in love.